All right, welcome everyone to Raise the Roof. And so we are live here today. I'm joined by my friend Kevin Briggins. We have a special guest, Owen Anderson, and eventually Leroy Hill will probably join us, but he's running late. I think he's in traffic, so he's a little stuck. So he'll have to just join us a few minutes late. But what I wanted to talk about, it's sort of a special episode of Raise the Roof. We don't always engage in some of the current events, at least not just directly, because we're doing it through a lot of philosophy books and through other kind of contexts, bringing in current events. But we want to direct actually with this issue of Christian education and sort of, I guess you could say, the wokeness in Christian education. Specifically, we're going to unpack a lot of video clips that come from the Charlie Sykes interview with Wesleyan University President Michael Roth. And Roth has sort of positioned himself as the brave defender of liberal education and academic freedom. This guy's standing in the gap against what he considers to be the fascist attacks of President Donald Trump. So we're going to unpack, is that true? How do we do this? And as Christians kind of responding to this, we're going to see if there's another way to look at that. Before bringing the guys, though, let me just give a little bit of background why this came to me, because I think it's kind of interesting. So I'll put up here on the screen, you can see that I've got this little email. I was part of Coursera, which is an online education. You can do certifications. And years ago, I took a course called The Modern and the Postmodern. And it was a course on philosophy taught by Michael Roth, who's the president of Wesleyan University. And so he sends out this random email about all his political interviews and articles that he's now written on Donald Trump. And he's pushing back against his oppression, against the destruction of Christian education, is how he puts it. And so I was like, okay, he's using this platform that I'm just trying to get some education about philosophy, and now he is advocating his views on this. So I'm like, okay, I've got to see what this is about. I start to look into some of his tweets, though. And so again, he's trying to position himself as this defender of this neutral, just Christianity is really what's driving me. But here's one of his recent tweets from David Brooks in the New York Times. It says, authoritarianism imposes a social vision by force. If you can't have social solidarity organically from the ground up, then you can impose it from the top down using the power of the state. This is the menace of Trumpianism. And then his other post here, he said, you don't need to like Biden or to love him, you just need to support him, because again, the great threat that Donald Trump places. And the last one I'll plan to pull up for now, he says, this is again from New York Times, where he's quoting all these stuff. He said, Biden's ethos harks back to the New Deal, but it also harks forward to something, to a form of center-left politics that is culturally moderate and economically aggressive in investing resources in the left behind places. So there we can kind of see a little bit of his view. Welcome, gentlemen. And with that backdrop, before we jump into the video clips, anything that strike you interesting about the posts I just read from Roth, thoughts on how he's tried to position himself as in this debate, in the situation, sort of the place he's taking in this?
I'll let Owen go first.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. My name's Owen Anderson. I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University, and also a pastor of Christ the King Reformed Church in Peoria, Arizona. And nice to be with you guys today. I've been friends with Joe for a while, and it's really good to meet Kevin today. And I think that what stands out to me is just that he's pushing the standard line from every leftist professor, which is that this is tyranny, totalitarianism, Nazism. And that kind of rhetoric is very dangerous. It's clearly not true. No Nazi or totalitarian decreases the size of their government. Neither do they say you need to leave. They force people to stay and put them in prisons. And so it's just a way of working up emotions. And it's sad to see the president of a Christian university fall into those same tactics. What I would advise him to do, because he clearly has very strong disagreements with Trump, is instead of using those kinds of rhetorical devices that speak to your audience, pick a thing that you disagree with. Say you don't like cutting back the size of the government, and then present an argument about why Trump is wrong about that. And that would be much more Christian and be a much better Christian witness than giving in to these easy personal attacks.
Yeah. Kevin,
Yeah.
what about you, man? Any thoughts as he's trying to frame himself in this whole thing?
Yeah. We use the term a lot. It kind of gets overused, but I think it applies here as Trump derangement syndrome, to where the fear of Trump just gets over exaggerated into these wild claims. And it's like when power on the right is used on the right, it's fascism. And when it's used by the left, it's good governance. And so you can kind of see his biases coming out, and his irrational fears about what he claims Trump is or what Trump is doing. It really just doesn't like the policies.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what
I do think it probably is the end of an era. I think we're seeing an entire era of American politics die, and a whole new one where there's going to be new rules, new approaches come out. So what's happening is someone like the president or professors I work with, they see that their entire life's project has come to an end. And perhaps he's connected up Christianity with American socialism. And that's not coming back.
Yeah.
And so you have also the end of your life's project. It failed. And so that hatred comes out of them. But it is fascinating that it was these leftists who had connected Christianity to their government project, which is what they accuse the right of.
Mm-hmm. There we go. There's Leroy, I think, coming in here. Hold on one second here. This is Leroy's going to join us here.
The man, the myth, the legend.
There he is.
There he is.
There he goes. There is Leroy Hill. All right, Leroy. Well, we just started some introductions now. You're just in time. So we just kind of summarize a few of the key ideas. What I want to do, though, is jump right into our first clip. And this is sort of sets the stage for Roth's framing of why he speaks out, why he's bravely speaking out as he sees himself against Trump. So check this out.
Well, I mean, so that is kind of surprising that there has not been more rejection. There has not been more pushback. And you actually you wrote a piece saying that you didn't think the university presidents were prepared for what is coming. You tried to warn them, right? And yet it does seem, and I've used this phrase over and over again, perhaps not surprising, but still shocking, how aggressive they've been, the degree to which they are prepared to shut down the entire research efforts,
Unbelievable.
Going, $400 million. Let me just read you something you wrote in Slate magazine. In the past month since Trump's victory in the general election, this was early on, leaders in the worlds of business and education have been rushing to show that they no longer have any political beliefs. Facts, why check them? Privilege, who's to say that the mega rich don't deserve their advantages? Anticipating how best to be obedient, they aim to please those at the vanguard of what Mark Zuckerberg calls the cultural tipping point. And then you wrote, it's one thing to be reminded that elections have consequences, but quite another to insist that the best response to the abuse of authority is to be restrained, demure, neutral. So it's not just higher education. It feels like all of civil society has decided, okay, don't make them mad. Keep your head down.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary moment, isn't it? Because it seems
is.
that every time someone does try to appease, it emboldens them to be more aggressive.
Exactly. I think it's John Mance, this writer who I see occasionally on Substack, called it a Vichy moment, where you
Very
decide, are you going to collaborate with the Nazis in Vichy France because you saved some of the dishwashers in your restaurant or you saved jobs in your bakery, but you collaborate with the Nazis. And the French, of course, they were such good collaborators that they made it much easier for the Nazis than it would have been otherwise. And, they deported extra Jews just to show how they were not going to make trouble. That's what's happening here. There are.
All right, that's what happens here. Apparently, Trump is, he is trying not to be France, compromising with the Nazis, and there's that rhetoric that you brought up, Owen, in your little in your intro part. He's leaning into it. What do you guys say?
Well, and it's really sad because it's insulting to the memory of the Jews who died in World War II and the people who fought and oftentimes gave their life to stop the Nazis. But it also tells you about a university president's understanding of the world. That's the only example he can go to. He has to go. It's basically it's like going from 0 to 100, where 100 is the most. If he has an opponent he disagrees with, he has to go to 100. That's all he's got. And it's very sad to see that, because there's a lot of examples you could use between a 0 and 100 with people you disagree with. But again, it also goes to my first point, which is just give an argument. You disagree about U.S. aid being cut. Tell us why we should do that when we're in debt and paying interest on our debt, instead of using these examples. Trump didn't invade France. He's not asking to round anybody up. In fact, he's telling people you need to leave. There's no similarities at all between Nazism and our current situation.
Yeah. He brought up Zuckerberg, so I'll use Zuckerberg as the example. Mark Zuckerberg testified that the Biden administration was trying to put pressure on them to silence people they wanted to be silenced in terms of certain rhetoric or positions. And he originally said they weren't going to do it. But then all of a sudden he said Meta started being investigated by all of these government agencies. And then they started to comply, right? But that's I guess that's just liberalism. That's just good governance, I guess, because he had nothing to say about the Biden administration's heavy-handed approach to actually silencing people. If you wanted to talk about authoritarianism, the Biden administration was very authoritarian in the ways in which it tried to go about, especially during, COVID, using OSHA to force people to get vaccinated and just different things like that. Where was he then? But the Trump administration is being compared to Nazis for no reason other than he doesn't like the fact that his leftist type policies are out the window now, and he disagrees with the current policies.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and especially coming from your perspective in cybersecurity, because Zuckerberg is then like the Vichy example, where he had to collaborate with the government or lose his business. It's the exact opposite. So it raises this question: why can't they see it's the opposite? And why, when you have an intellectual Christian, why do they always punch right? And they always try to help you understand the left. The left has good intentions. They're just basically implementing the social gospel. But anything on the right, they either ignore it, the abuses that happen to the conservatives, or they attack the conservatives. And you don't ever see the Christian intellectual, although I count myself as one, but you don't see the others doing that, saying we need to call out the left as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. To be called Vichy is to be a traitor or collaborator with evil, right? And that's exactly what that person is saying, is to not battle or make war against the Trump administration, which is duly elected, right? Elected by 77 million people, roughly half of the electorate, a little bit more than half the electorate. So ultimately what they're saying is the people who are on that side are evil, right? And without ever explaining exactly why they're evil. And what's really amazing about it is it just demonstrates that they're working on a set of presuppositions and a worldview that is completely self-referential. In other words, it assumes that their ideas are 100% right, the right motives, the right reasons to live, the right ways in which to think. And anybody that is opposed to that self-referential view or those motives or those quote unquote norms are evil. They don't have a different worldview. They don't have a different perspective. They're just evil people.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think about, like the analogy here, and it was like one of the images that came to I think a lot of people, not just Roth, but a lot of people, like Roth wants to see himself as Gandalf standing in the gap against the Balrog. You shall not pass. I am the lone hero of this. But or in reality, he's either Sauron and doesn't realize he's been corrupted, or he's Don Quixote tilting at windmills. Exactly. I don't know which he actually is in truth, but maybe Don Quixote a little bit. But I just there's a lack of self-awareness, which is so striking, because I've been through his philosophy course, like I said, in the modern and the postmodern, and otherwise, I thought he had a lot of great takes, and it just shocked me, I guess, a little bit seeing that.
What's interesting is I was reading a guy named Alasdair MacIntyre, and he has a book called I think it's Whose Justice or something. I know it's Whose Justice. That's the second part of the title. But what he argued is that there isn't just one way to be rational in the world. In other words, there are a multiplicity of rationalities. And the problem that we have is we never really test our rationality against to see whether it really corresponds with reality. And because he has tested that way of thinking, or he's built for himself a bubble, a nice little bubble, where he gets to decide what the norms are and what righteousness is and what truth is and everything else that doesn't fit into that world. I mean, it's easy then from that standpoint to demonize and marginalize people rather than dialogue with people. And I guarantee if you listen to him and Mr. Sykes there, they would both argue that, we need to be dialoguing with people. But how do you dialogue with people that you're consistently demonizing?
Yeah, we're going to get back to that.
And they would say that's what Trump does, right? They would say the problem with Trump is he demonizes everybody as they demonize 77 million Trump voters.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get back. We have some clips on that too, but I got to show this real quick. I'm going to put it up on the screen. So Adam, watching on YouTube, says, here for Dr. Anderson, but really enjoying the insights from the others as well. So I'm glad the others are doing okay. We're holding up our own.
Yeah, thanks for watching, Adam. Adam's a good friend.
Yeah, so as long as we can hold up with you, we're all right. If Adam says we're okay, we're all right. So with that,
advertised. I sent out your advertisement. So I
know. Well, you're the only one. So that's what it takes. Leroy, I'm just glad when he shows up, but so.
hey man, I got a job. I got to be there. I got to
I got to work. I got to earn money.
Yeah, not only professors. Like, what does the professor do? They're just making podcasts all day.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But
what's interesting to me working, I'm in a secular university. We're currently the largest state university in the country. We have 183,000 students between in-person and online. And our humanities programs are completely taken by critical race theory, conflict theory of history, John Money, gender studies. That's just the assume. What Leroy said, they'll just assume that worldview and then they'll act as if it's true. Whereas one of the virtues of a liberal education was that it teaches you to question even yourself. So it doesn't mean you can't know anything, but at least you should have the ability to see your assumptions and go through the process of questioning them and see how they shape the way you interpret the world. And we've completely lost that ability. It's a very simple lens that the humanists have now, which is either you're on the side of critical race theory, conflict theory, whatever version they have now, or you're a Nazi. Those are the two options. And it's such a anti-intellectual view. I think it does show the end of American universities at that stage. But this is what I said a little bit earlier, I think before you joined, Leroy, which is I think we're seeing the end of an age of American politics, really for both the Democrats and the Republicans. Things are being changed so much that going forward from here, it's going to be a completely different rules. But I believe that could also happen for our universities, which would be great.
Do you think that this is fear-based? In other words, the way that they've drawn their circles is to emotionally wrap their ideas in a truth, so to speak, not nothing that's written, not nothing that corresponds to reality, but in a truth that is amenable to them. But it's fear-based. It's protectionism. It isn't strong enough to be tested against the world that we live in and the realities that we live in. In other words, how do you think that they're doing this just to protect themselves? I guess is the easiest way to say it.
Well, I would think for sure. I mean, and you're right to say I would say emotional based, because it's not just fear based, but they have this idea that we're talking about Christian ones right now, although I work only with atheist ones. But Christian examples, they think the gospel is such that the federal government of the United States should be giving social welfare. That's the equivalent of the Christian gospel. And so any threat to that is a threat to the gospel itself. However, they would strongly object if the federal government said you should go to church.
Right.
They say, whoa, that's crossing the line. So they have it's kind of just the end of that social gospel century, the end of social gospel liberalism, where they're using the federal government and states governments to implement that. And so for Christians on that side, they've just never been challenged about this. And so it is emotional, because for them it's as if they're losing Christianity, even though they've made their conservative brothers and sisters in Christ lose a ton over the last century, constantly putting down conservative forms of Christianity. But now it's really coming to the end of that, a century of social gospel, and it's being challenged on things that, I think it was Charlie Kirk that gave a montage going back to Bill Clinton, of Bill Clinton, Obama, Biden saying, we've got to cut the budget. We've got to cut the budget. Doing nothing different than Elon and Trump, but they're Democrats.
Yeah.
And so I think that this century of the government is doing these things for us is over. The way that we've done post-World War II politics is over, and everyone's scrambling now to figure out what's the new rules going to be. We don't know yet. But then you got guys like this who are, you're right, they're just protecting their little empires.
Yeah, and that's where, let me jump in real quick though. I want to show one more clip, because it's going to set this. Probably your comment still relates to this too, Leroy, but what your question actually, I think, this little clip, just the idea that freedom is under attack, right? That's their framework to thinking this, and that's the sort of fear language, the emotional language, but also what Owen's talking about too, just their frame. From their perspective, if it's not supporting what I believe is true, then that is my freedom. Yes, my freedom impinged on your freedom, but when you restrict mine, then it's bad. Then it's America is over. But check out this clip. Here's Dr. Roth talking about this.
First of all, I don't want to blame people for keeping their heads down. That seems like blaming somebody who gets assaulted for wearing provocative clothing. I mean, it's the assault that's the story. I had a teacher at Wesleyan, Philip Halley, wrote this book on a group of a French village that did resist the Nazis in extraordinary ways, and it was very hard to know exactly why they were. It was a Protestant village, and that seemed to have something to do with it. They were used to being minorities and resistant. There were a couple of people who stood up. Sometimes it just takes a few people. I mean, you know this, Charlie. I mean,
collective action.
One of those Republicans who's refused to just go along with the tide, and so
it's kind of lonely.
I think I'm not sure why. When people say to me what you're saying, why are you being so courageous or something, it makes me very nervous. I don't feel courageous. I feel extremely nervous. I talk to my wife. What are you going to do if something happens? I mean, but at the same time, it's so astonishing that I'm a professor of history that I would have to worry about the government. I mean, this is America. I've been critical of America. I'm one of those leftists who were, pontificating about the anti-colonialism. But I've taken for granted American freedom. And right now, it's so obvious we can't take it for granted. So we have to speak up, because that freedom could disappear.
Oh, I really
so brave.
Owen,
brave.
This is one of the quotes that I really had to get you on for, and I'm glad you could at least do for a little bit with us, because he's like, oh, my freedom's under attack. I can't say what I want to say anymore, and so he seems to think that has never existed before Trump, and so I'm thinking that maybe in your context at ASU, you might have maybe one example over your entire career where that might have maybe happened.
Well, what's amazing to me is, again, he's a historian. To confess that after his poor analogy with Nazism, his misunderstandings of history, and the inability to draw analogies, and then admit it here, which is, did he say he protests for anti?
He was anti-colonialist.
Yeah. So without knowing any details of his career, so I want to look into that. I'm not making assertions. He has most likely been complicit in keeping conservative Christians from either being hired or heard at universities. Their freedom has been taken away, and that's been documented by sources like College Fix or the Pew Research Center. The College Fix did a study at ASU last fall, and out of 5 schools they looked at, I don't remember if it was 2,000 or 3,000 professors, they found 3 Republicans. And so he has lived in that environment, had been perfectly fine with it, never spoken up once. And now he's worried about freedom being taken away. It's a joke.
Yeah, it's projection. What would he say about the conservative voices who were just being censored over the last 4 years? I mean, and that's documented. I mean, you had Mark Zuckerberg and others come on and say that this is exactly what was happening? Where was his voice standing up for his conservative, brothers? And it's the worst kind of projecting.
And they act like there's some jail that liberal professors are being sent to, that his wife is worried. I mean, as a liberal professor, his job is guaranteed, so he's not going to lose his job. What is he talking about? What is his wife losing sleep over these worries? Whereas conservatives, when they speak up, they do lose their jobs. They are harassed at work. I'm going through this in a few different ways that Joe knows about at ASU. I'm involved in a lawsuit. I'm involved in harassment for my conservative and Christian viewpoints at ASU. So we live these things, and that's something that I've said about my colleagues. I've sat through 25 years of faculty meetings where they talk about the need to include the oppressed and marginalized voices, and about how evil white Christian men are. And in that room and at the university, I'm the marginalized, oppressed voice. I've lived through what they don't like, what they think they're protecting, and they don't see it. They're unable to see that they're doing this, that if I was to speak the way they are...
Can I correct you? They're not unable to see it. They're unwilling. They're unwilling to see it.
Yeah.
Because it's obvious. They're completely able to see it. And I could... It fires me up because it is the worst kind of lie that you can believe. Like, they have been the liberal, left, or I should say the illiberal left, has been the dominant culture in our society since Clinton, if you will, and if not even before that. And they've owned every aspect of every media center, every cultural center, every major city, every academic arena, the education of our children, Hollywood, everything. They own everything. And all of a sudden, they're the ones who are under attack. Maybe what it is people have waken up and said, no more of this silliness. No more. And that's the real frightening thing.
And I love being with you guys. Unfortunately, I have a time limit, but I want to share two things real quick. One is, to your point, Leroy, when I brought this up to colleagues, there's two levels of response. The first level is, oh no, we would never, be opposed to anybody. We're welcoming to everybody. And I say, but you said this. This is a quote of what you said about, say, a conservative Christian. And then if you get to the second level, which is the honesty level, they'll say, yeah, but it's your turn. It's your turn to experience it. That's what's in their hearts. It doesn't always come out of their mouths, but that's what's in their hearts. The second thing is, in one way, he's right. America is over. That vision of America ended when 77 million Americans said, we don't want it. And Leroy's right. It's ruled since the 60s, the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, and it's done. Now, something worse might emerge. The Democrats are going to come up with some plan. Who knows what it'll be? So I'm not saying it's like smooth sailing from here. I'm just saying this is an era of history that's done. And so they can say, man, America, as I understood it, where the liberals ruled, conservative Christians couldn't get jobs in our universities, man, that America's over.
Yep.
I say,
don't
rest in peace.
It's like you said, we don't know what is going to emerge, but I will tell you, I was remarking to my wife on the way home, driving 85 miles an hour, but dodging. No, I wasn't dodging in and out of traffic, but when I was driving home, I said to my wife, I have never in my entire life seen so many negative reels just in my stuff. From people I don't even watch, telling me that the world is coming to an end. The economic world is coming to an end. I've never seen so many of those things. And it dawned on me, this is exactly how they're trying to influence people, their grip on reality. And they went too far. I mean, this is the one thing about evil we all know. Evil always overreaches. And
I can't believe they're doubling down. I mean, I thought after November, okay, they got it. The guys in women's sports, all that stuff is done, and they're doubling and tripling down. And you're seeing it from the post.
That lets you know it's not just
Go ahead, Kevin.
I'll say that just lets you know it's not just politics. They're bought into the ideology. This is their worldview. This is their religion. This is their faith. And in their minds, they're losing their faith. They're losing their religion. That's why you're seeing the extreme reactions to this, because you're right, Owen, that it's over. And they've realized that.
And this is why
I'm gonna log back on to watch the rest of it once you post it, because I want to see more about Kevin. And
thanks for joining us for a little bit.
Really good to be with you all.
All right, Owen.
Take care.
Nice to meet you all. Nice to see you.
All right. So,
All right.
yeah. So, okay, let me use that point as a transition point here. So here's what I want to do, because there's so many clips that bring out exactly all of these points, and I want to try to make sure we get to all of these thoughts. But what I want to go is to the specific issue of campus protests, because there's a point in Roth's interview where he's trying to give examples of the fascist oppression of Trump and all these sort of things, and he's talking about Colombia and just the crackdown, and all these universities are just kowtowing. The Vichy universities crackdown. They're compromising, unlike him, again, standing bold and strong because he's such a brave man against whatever he's afraid of, which you have no idea. But so before I get this clip, though, I think the order I want to show is, first I want to show two little news clips from two different stations in different parts of the country that talk about, and they show some images. So if you're listening to the podcast later, you can check this out on the Substack. I'll still have the video archived there as well, but you can at least see some of this stuff playing out that goes along with the dialogue. And then we'll come back in, and then I'll transition. I'll actually see what he says about this and where he's trying to position himself. So here's the clip first.
Overnight, campus protests escalating. Demonstrators occupying a building at Columbia University, smashing windows, barring the doors, and unfurling banners, including one reading Intifada. After protesters circled the campus earlier in the night, the unrest coming just hours after the university started suspending students who refused to leave an encampment after a deadline had passed. A growing number of universities are cracking down on pro-Palestinian protests spreading across college campuses. Overnight, at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, clashes between police and protesters on campus leading to arrests. And at UCLA in the early hours of the morning, authorities in tactical gear moving in during confrontations between dueling demonstrators. Earlier in the day, the students storming through a building and waving the Palestinian flag. Some Jewish students frustrated.
I have wholeheartedly always supported the right to freedom of protest and the freedom of speech, but when that starts to impede upon our right to education and be able to freely walk on campus, that's where I have an issue.
USF protested in favor of Palestine today. The protest comes just one day after a bomb scare caused the Jewish Student Center on campus to be evacuated.
Now some Jewish students there say they feel unsafe on campus and undermined by the university.
I spoke with a group of Jewish students today. They don't want their names used or faces shown because they say they have been directly threatened on campus.
We are scared. We shouldn't have to be scared. We have had people who had to find somewhere else to sleep last night because they were worried about their dorms.
After their building was evacuated and searched yesterday, no explosive devices were found. But late yesterday, USF put out a statement saying it had been a misunderstanding and no crime was committed.
We kind of felt like we had been blindsided and backstabbed at the same time.
The students say it feels like the university isn't listening to their safety concerns.
We feel like we're not being taken seriously.
Okay, so that's the framework, that's the background. We all remember that. We'll come back to some more specific examples because there's so much more. But let's now go to Roth directly. And here's what he has to say about this. And here's the way he's positioning himself and reframing his memory holding a lot of these incidents.
The arrest of Mahmoud Khalil should terrify every college president. And I just want to read the first three paragraphs. Well, I made them into paragraphs that you wrote. I'm no fan of the pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University, and they would certainly not be fans of mine. Although I've been outspoken in my opposition to the Trump administration's march to authoritarianism over the past several weeks, I've also publicly opposed the divestment movement, written about my Judaism in connection to Israel, and urged dialogue rather than puerile sloganeering on campuses. Student protesters, I've made clear, must observe reasonable time and place restrictions. They cannot disrupt the core university functions without accountability. It should go without saying these restrictions should be content neutral. The content of your views, unless they veer into harassment and intimidation, should have no bearing on the restrictions you face. This is fundamental to freedom of speech. So you've taken this nuanced position. You are in the middle. You are pro-Israel. You are pro-academic freedom. So talk to me about why you think this case of Mahmoud Khalil is a turning point for university leadership.
Well, it's clear that he was arrested in order to scare the heck out of everybody, right? Because for many people like me, a liberal guy who's, I may critical of the Netanyahu regime, but I'm a defender of Israel's right to exist. That somebody with Khalil's politics and participating in some of those demonstrations, we wouldn't be very sympathetic.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they come to arrest him. They think he has a student visa. He doesn't have a student visa. They come up with a cockamamie story that it's going to make this huge difference to the national security of the United States. The Secretary of State has to himself make a determination. I mean, it's clearly a cock and bull story in order to show people that the government could arrest whomever they want because they're the government. And so that means that we can protect people from governmental abuse with the rule of law.
All right, gentlemen, what do you say?
I'll just say this. In my time in academia, I have learned not to be surprised by how stupid smart people can be. Because, I mean, the things he just said make no sense. To frame it as if Khalil is just some guy that was just handing out pamphlets and organizing peaceful marches, right? No, we saw the videos. We saw what they were doing. We saw the taking over of buildings, busting out windows, locking doors. And he was the organizer of it. And not only that, he was the leader. He was the one who was negotiating their demands with the university. And so he's the face of this thing, and he's not a U.S. citizen. And so to try to pretend that his arrest is some kind of, turning point into authoritarianism and we're all at risk now because if he could be arrested, man, what does it say about the rest of us? Well, it says the rest of us aren't leading violent protests as non-U.S. citizens. That's what it says. The fact that he would even frame it that way just shows that he's completely disconnected from the actual facts or reality on the ground, because he's made Khalil and he's made the protesters out to be the victims, when in reality it was the people they were hurting and the university in which they held hostage, to meet their demands. And so once you understand that, it's like, how do you then make this analogy that his arrest is a kind of a marker to the rest of us are in danger? It's not logical, it's not rational, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, and think about what they're saying. Okay, when they want to put you into the courts, they can dig up whatever law in the past, even if it doesn't apply to the situation, and then utilize that law in the courts and have you thrown in jail or have you subjected to the requirements of the law, even in the face of the Supreme Court saying to you that this law does not apply in this situation. And without a court order, they would not have, they would have refused to re-adjudicate those people's cases because that laws didn't apply, and they've actively resisted to it. Now juxtapose that with the fact that, as you said, this gentleman was not a citizen. He did not have the same rights that citizens have, and when the government acts on the law and says, look. And I like what Marco Rubio said. He said, look, if you would have told us that this is what this guy was going to do, if he'd have told us that before he applied, then we wouldn't have let him in, that he was going to do all those things. That he got here and did all those things says that we're not going to allow him to stay. And that is one of the downsides of not being a citizen. You cannot go to Australia. You cannot go to London, England. You cannot go to Japan. You cannot go to Korea. You cannot go to any other nation and flout their laws and expect not to be held accountable to those laws. I mean, Brittany Griner, for example, she thought that her athletic status would keep her out of jail in Russia. Go figure. You can't do that. These nations have laws. He's not a citizen here, and he's not subject to the rights as citizens. And the problem with this that I see is, and this is the whole point of the previous administration, is they've watered down what it means to be a citizen. And because they've watered down what it means to be a citizen, they can conflate any status that they want to that of citizenship and apply all the laws, rights, and benefits to those who are non-citizens that citizens have, and it's ridiculous. His problem is that it fits this particular worldview, its particular way of seeing the world. Calling people fascist for applying the law, or applying the law and letting the courts adjudicate. As a matter of fact, that is the right way to do it. You want to apply a law from 1938 to the status of people, go ahead and apply the law, but let the courts have their say. And that's exactly what's going on now. That guy was flown from here to New Jersey to Louisiana. The courts are adjudicating his case before he'll be expelled. But the law says that the Secretary of State can revoke a green card or whatever he wants to. That's his right. He doesn't really have to give you an excuse or a reason for doing it. That's unfortunate, but that's the law. Yeah. I mean, are we a nation of laws or not?
Yeah, well, and this is the part that just gets on my nerves about something like what Roth is doing here, because it's so dishonest. It's just blatant dishonesty. It's outright lying. He's just gaslighting everybody into thinking, well, because he tries to sound reasonable. Well, I'm trying to of course we can protest and have uncomfortable ideas, and we can all say these things. And I would never support bad stuff, but this is bad. But he's acting as if nothing bad ever happened. He's pretending that there hasn't been, Jews on campus who have been afraid to walk to class. Yeah. I mean, there's videos that I could pull up where you could see the protesters on different campuses coming at Jewish students and in their face with signs and knocking their phones out of their hands and doing all kinds of things to them, and not even allowing them to go to their own class. No, because you're not allowed to go to this class because people are dying, and they're physically keeping them from being a part of the classes that they pay to attend. But he pretends none of that happened so that he can make the fiction that stopping this innocent, poor, wilting flower of a protester who just give peace a chance. That's all he wants. It's just a dishonest framing of it. Even the law stuff aside, I mean, I'm not saying we should put it aside, but I'm saying whether it's the courts will figure this out, that's going to find. There's no indication Trump has defied any court ruling or order at this point anyway. But the facts on the ground don't matter because they're trying to tell a story. He needs to tell a narrative, and that narrative is he feels a certain way, and his feelings are going to determine this. And I'm really shocked that somebody who's studied philosophy as he has and teaches a good course on this just can't even see his own worldview blindness to this idea. But for him, it's just this idea that we're on this one other clip on this stuff, and then I want to get into how he frames himself as a classical liberal and whether that's true, and even in the Christian sense of where some of his theology of morality is. But for his framing, he sees us on this slippery slope to fascism.
But okay, so let me just push back on this a little bit, because of course they would argue that there are limits to free speech. That if in fact you are engaging in harassment, or you are making other students feel unsafe, or you are providing aid and comfort and support for international terrorists, and you are not an American citizen, that you're a candidate for detention and deportation. This organization that he was affiliated with engaged in some rather radically anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli rhetoric, and did seem to provide support for Hamas in the days after its terrorist attack. So in terms of the public, people are going to say, yeah, you know what? We don't need this guy.
That's true. And that's why they pick on this guy first.
Right.
But then they're going to pick on someone like you. Mm-hmm.
You see what he just admitted there? He's like, well, sure. Then this guy clearly was doing all those bad things, but then they're going to do it to us.
Yes.
Complete delusion. That's talk about Trump derangement syndrome. It is complete delusion. It's this fear that, all this stuff is going to happen to us. Oh, look what Trump, he arrested this guy. He's going to arrest me. It's complete fear, and it's completely irrational. And even very smart people with degrees in philosophy are not immune to it. And so, yeah. What you got, Leroy?
Yeah, he gave up the ghost. I mean, he admitted that people who make the claim that he deserves to be deported are right. So, in the name of that, as you ain't got to go home, but you got to get on out of here. you got to go.
Well, it shows you too that he's not afraid of Trump in any real sense at all, too. Because here's the thing: it's just all posturing. He knows there's no fear. He's the president of his own university. He's built faculty around him that share his, progressive religious ideas. The student body, it's a small university, so he's attracted to students who've all been indoctrinated into that thinking. There's no protests on campus against him speaking out. He has no fear in life about any of that stuff. And here's the proof. Listen to what actually happened to this thing. I was watching this. This is why I had to do this thing. I'm just wanted you people. It's like I just wanted some people on here, right? I wanted you guys, or try to get several others. I wanted like 10 of us on here. I'm like, so I want you guys on here. But I was like, he's like, the guys, well, let me just give some mild pushback. Like, some people might say that he did these things, and there's these accusations. I mean, he might have done it. I mean, it's not even saying he did bad stuff. It's just the most mild, tiny, tepid pushback. Some could maybe suggest that he did wrong things. What do you have to say? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that actually happened, but sure, it doesn't matter. It's going to happen to us if we don't stop it now. It's like, it wasn't even actual pushback with evidence. It was just sort of tepid shove against a gentle prod against, what if somebody might disagree with you? Well, then I'd give it up. I'd just stop saying that, because it's really about this other evil that might happen, that hasn't happened, but it might. Jeez.
Yeah, there's I think probably one of the most informative classes I ever took was, obviously yours, Dr. Miller, the ethics class. That's in the top like 2 or 3, right? Maybe 3, right? Maybe 4.
Man, I'm getting down there now after time. You must be taking better classes as time goes on.
But probably one of the most important truths that are learned in church history. Ask this question: what does the church have to do with Athens? I think that is the question for church history. What does the church have to do with Athens? And as we listen to this guy, I cannot help but think that for him, the church and Athens are one and the same, right? Church and state, church and government, they are one and the same. So if you take away Athens and all you leave him with is the church, he doesn't believe that the church has any power whatsoever. He doesn't believe that the church has any cultural resources to apply in a situation like this, or that he's afraid that if left to the church, they wouldn't apply it in a way that would enfranchise his particular views. So he argues for a very plastic amalgamation of church and state, where, as you said, Dr. Miller, he is protected. He is a protected voice. He's the president of the university. More than likely, he's good friends with all the board and regents. He's not going to get removed for having his anti-Trump, anti-Republican, anti-conservative, anti-anything right of the left view. He's never going to get in trouble for that. So this is, as you called it earlier, this is quixotic. He is just tilting at windmills. He is bloviating to make himself feel good. And I can say this for this reason. When Donald Trump ran the first time, I was never Trump. I used to tell myself I was never Trump till the casket dropped. I did not vote for him. I did not like him. I thought that he was the worst example that we could ever have for president. But I will tell you something that was very interesting. I found myself, when expressing those views, able to go from 0 to 100 and to go from 0 and just be 100% angry and mad. And when I began to pull those ideas apart, I knew that what it was a inward virtue signaling. To put it very bluntly, it was virtue signaling on my part, because here was somebody that I felt I was morally superior to because of their own stated views, their own stated actions. And when I began to look at that, I started to say to myself, who the heck am I? I don't know that man. I've never met that man. I've never talked to that man. I don't know why he is that way. And this guy would really benefit from that, because his virtue signaling is insane. It is insane.
Yeah, the thing is, he frames himself, and this is what I want to show this quick clip, and then because you lead into this, Leroy, talking about the church and ethics and what do we speak into this, and it's really his progressive politics that determine more of his moral stance than his biblical theology, and maybe that comes from too much philosophy, and he just lost ties to the scripture. I don't know. I can't speak to why. I just know that, he positions, Joe Biden as a just barely left of center moderate, and given his policies, that's after 4 years of his policies. But he considers himself a classic liberal. Check out this part, and then we'll see where we go with this.
And people should feel safe enough to engage in learning. But if they don't want to feel, I don't want them to feel too safe. There's no right not to be offended. These are the kinds of things I've tried to argue. It's in some ways the classic liberal view of John Stuart Mill and others that you have to tolerate dissent, even offensiveness, but you don't have to tolerate situations that erode the capacity to participate in speech going forward. And I think I'm happy to accept that some schools and certainly some individuals and associations eroded the free speech protections by being too concerned about feelings. But right now we're faced with a government that is willing to put people in jail over these things. And so, whereas before we were saying folks walking on eggshells was the phrase because they didn't want to offend their students, I've always said, well, then you shouldn't be a teacher if you're afraid of offending your students. You should offend them, and they should understand why you're offending them, and they should learn. Right now, we're seeing, however, a government with enormous power saying these are views that are off limits. And although these are views that are unpopular, views that I myself don't like, I will have to defend the rights of those people to hold those views, as long as those views are not directed at individuals in ways that intimidate them or harass them.
Okay, so I'm putting it back on the screen because that is just, I think that's all just flat out lies, to be honest, and disinformation. He doesn't, I searched his internet history and I tried to find anything. Was he ever outspoken about Biden putting, pro-lifers in jail for their protests? Was he concerned about the oppressiveness of the Biden Department of Justice and the way they were acting and silencing and actually putting people in jail for their beliefs? I don't think he ever was. But so check out this though. Here's what I did find on his thread. So here is an image. This is from a tweet he had. He said, "Hate thrives when people who are not transgender believe that attacks on trans people do not affect them. This is exactly backwards. Whether we are transgender or cisgender, we are all harmed by state-mandated gender norms." But of course, he only means by that when the Trump mandates that, not that you have to, the mandate to use gendered pronouns or people who are silenced to refuse to use those things. This only goes one way, of course. Then he writes this in another tweet: gender-affirming care for the treatment of gender dysphoria is medically necessary care, full stop. That's it. That's his full stop statement on that. And then last one on these says, "My trans students made me think hard about transformation and identity, about nature and convention, about character and performance, recognition and reassurance. We are so important. We're so important then. It's even more important that we stand with trans people today." And that actually last one comes from an entire article that he wrote, and it's on the university website where he has his blog. And that's actually a tweet he gave, but again, that is from his university official president blog, so that's his full position. Where do you go with that, guys? Kevin?
Yeah, so I read that trans article, and he believes the Trump administration is going after trans people, and he's full-blown the rhetoric you would expect someone on the progressive left to have. This is what I'll say about that clip, and why I say you say he's lying. I agree with you. If your professors are afraid to offend their students, it's only because they don't feel they have the support of the administration. right? That is the only time professors are afraid that what they say in the classroom is going to come back on them. They're not just afraid of students. They're afraid if they don't have the support of the administration. So him trying to pretend as if he's saying, no, offend them and they got to get over and they got to be tough. I don't believe that at all. Because if he had that approach, his faculty would not be saying they were afraid to offend the students. Because they would have the backing of the president and the university. And we've seen this in universities before. Everybody's familiar with like the Evergreen College situation, right? Where and this is the thing too. Look at his position on the Columbia situation. It wasn't that the students were wrong. It wasn't that the protesters were wrong, right? And the universities weren't wrong for giving into the students. They're only wrong for giving into the Trump administration. And so you can tell he's the kind of president that is going to back and support the student activists. He's not going to go against that. And so, no, his faculty doesn't feel comfortable saying the things that are going to set off the students because he's going to have the back of the students, right? And so, it's obvious that what he's saying in that clip isn't true.
What's interesting is he speaks as if he's not the president of the university. He speaks as if there are not people who are being disenfranchised by the protests. He speaks as if there are people who are not being harassed by the protests. He speaks as if there are people who are not being inconvenienced by not being able to go to class that they pay thousands and thousands of dollars for. He speaks as if there are people on campus who are not being marginalized because of their heritage or their ethnicity. He speaks as if all of these things are not happening because, and this is intersectionality at work, the Jewish people need to be put down and the Palestinian cause needs to be lifted up. So what if these American students are disenfranchised, are put out, are marginalized, are hurt, threatened, afraid? So what if they feel this way? The Palestinians feel this way, so they must feel this way.
The only way to correct injustice is more injustice. It's the Ibram X. Kendi view, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I remember years ago. This is probably 10 years ago. I remember a case, and this is not the only one, just one of the ones that sticks in my mind. There was a young gal, and I think it was the University of Georgia. She was trying to be, she was going to school to be a clinical psychology and do therapy and stuff like that. And basically, there was a whole session that came up where how do you do counseling, say, for a gay couple? And she said, well, I'm a Christian. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. That wouldn't be my experience anyway. So I'd probably refer them out to somebody who maybe had that experience, that understood, because I wouldn't even understand their circumstances anyway. So I couldn't even help counsel them. So she wasn't even saying that they were evil or they shouldn't be married. She was just saying, I wouldn't have the framework to counsel them, so I would give them somebody else who could understand that context. They literally, either she had to go to re-education training or she was going to be kicked out of her master's program because she couldn't be licensed to practice, marriage and therapy in that state if she had that private view, right? If she had the view that marriage is between a man and woman, she never even said she'd tell people that. She just said, I wouldn't counsel anybody in that. And even from a pragmatic stance, I just couldn't really even understand their issues the same way I could understand somebody else's. But that was not enough for the state. So to pretend that there aren't thousands of cases like that different law groups have taken over the last 15 years from Dr. Roth's friends on the progressive left who have silenced so many people for their even private views, and they've lost jobs because of that, or they've been kicked out or not hired by universities. There are Christian universities that won't hire people who believe in marriage between one man and one woman. Now, on their public websites, they believe it because that's for the donor class. But I know from firsthand people telling me this, stories but privately, like, hey, we just don't want you talking about this publicly. Don't take that stance, or don't speak about this in the class because that will offend our students. So again, he's just either completely ignorant or just flat out lying or willfully blind, something along those lines. He can figure out his own mental states. But all I know is what he says is not true, and he's trying to frame himself as this moderate, open-minded person is just flat out a lie. Sorry for my diatribe there, but
no, it's madness. I mean, it is total madness. And you know that the amazing thing is, it's not the America that we grew up in. It just isn't the America that we grew up in. Don't get me wrong. I'm not waxing nostalgically about the way America, used to be. I'm sure that you're always going to find someone who is disenfranchised, someone who feels marginalized, some people who are always marginalized. But you know what? Publicly, we always knew it was wrong. We always knew it was wrong. And even if we didn't agree with it, or even if it benefited us, we knew it was wrong. I am reminded of a debate that happened in the 1960s between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley. And the debate ends on this particular topic. And the topic is James Baldwin is super angry, and rightfully so. He's super angry that that whites in that day and time will not see things his way, and cannot be forced to see things his way. But I remember how Buckley responded, and he says, "How would you force them to do that? Would you really want to force them to do that? It's impossible for you to force them to come to that agreement. This is something that people have to come to themselves. This is America. They have to be able to arrive at this state of mind about the way things ought to be themselves. And we ought to do, as intellectuals, as Christians who believe in a biblical worldview, we ought to be able to endeavor to convince people that this is the right way to live. What we shouldn't do is speak out of both sides of our mouth, disenfranchise one in order to enfranchise another. And I mean, if the church has done it in the past, then shame on aspects of the church who've done that. But we who think right and properly biblically should not stand for it, and should not stand for guys like this who are, as you said, and I'm, I don't know the man. I mean, I think that he is delusional. I mean, at best. At worst, he's one of the worst liars that we've ever seen. And I hope to think that he's just delusional, because no one can say the things.
I think he's just delusional. I think he believes what he's saying. I do.
Yeah, I believe that's where I'm at. But you can't. I mean, you can't speak this way and have reasonable people think that you have good sense. You just can't.
Yeah. Well, and again, the whole the reason I bring up the transgender one was because here again, it's an issue where the traditional Christian has been silenced on those issues up until 5 minutes ago, but he pretends that doesn't exist. And now trying to say, hey, trying to force my child into the bathroom with a girl, he's calling that the oppression, right? That's the harm being done. This is again the delusion of the leftist Christian in this case, who has used progressive politics as the bellwether and the benchmark for his ethical standards. And that's true on the issue of DEI. And I want to get into this because we've all talked about this before. We've all, cut our teeth on this one over the last 7-8 years, doing plenty of shows on this. But here's one of these little clips about this where he's concerned about people being unfairly targeting DEI.
Well, and this obviously is not just about academic freedom. It's about the First Amendment if you're involving government action. And I thought it was rather extraordinary, a story that hasn't gotten as much attention as it deserves, that you have the acting U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., writing a letter threatening Georgetown Law School, which is a Jesuit university, not a government university, not a public university, threatening them for the way they were handling DEI. Now, we can have a debate about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but he seemed to be targeting the way it was being taught in the law school, which it's hard for me to imagine anyone, even some of the most vocal critics of higher education, thinking that it's appropriate for the U.S. attorney to threaten a private institution of higher learning for the content of its curriculum.
Yeah, it was absurd, and I thought the dean of the law school wrote a strong and measured response to the acting attorney there. But the overreach of saying how you should teach, what you should teach, the letter to Columbia says we can't restore your funding unless you put these departments in receivership, without any explanation as to why those departments, was there an investigation? I mean, it's one thing to have the pressure of social media or students telling you you're offensive, not pleasant, not great.
Right.
It's another thing to have a U.S. attorney or officials of the federal government in other capacities going into private institutions and telling them how to teach.
All right, before I bring the guys back in, okay, I have this other clip I want to show to follow up, because he's just talking about DEI as if it's like, how dare they speak to private institutions about these it's just different speech, it's different things, except there are laws against racism. There are laws like Title IX. There's all kinds of laws in place that the government, even if you're a private institution, there's certain things you aren't allowed to do. And ask any conservative institution who's been sort of bullied into changing their curriculum over the years by his progressive left, which he pretends doesn't exist. But watch this little clip. I got this one just for you guys, and then I'm coming right back to you on this one.
You're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually, instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist.
Okay, so this is what Roth believes is just amazing, and the government should have no influence on that kind of thinking. Gentlemen.
I like how the white lady is on the side drinking water.
Oh,
that down. She had to have it, because you need a glass of water to take that pill. That was the most insane. That is insane. It is insane. Listen, this stems from the fact that people don't understand what racism is. Now, they give you this newfangled definition that wants to necessarily entangle racism with power. See, if you entangle racism with power, you can now exclude blacks from being racist, because of course blacks have no power, except the fact that we had this black president, who was, probably the most powerful person in our country. But aside from all of that, that's why they give you this newfangled definition of racism. But see, the racism definition that I understand says thinking yourself better than people is racism, but thinking yourself worse than other people, inferior to other people, is racism as well. So there's an inferior aspect that makes you a racist, and there's a supremacy aspect that makes you a racist. Sitting in a room where someone tells you that you're taught to be a demon and you're not even human, and drinking water and not getting up and telling this person that you're an idiot and I'm leaving I feel sad for those people. I was angry for a minute, but I just feel like, what is wrong with you people? What is wrong?
Kevin, can the government speak into this sort of thing when it's in our curriculum? And is that fascism? Tell us about it.
I feel like this. I will take him up on that. I will agree with him that the government should not have any say-so in a private institution. Therefore, based on his own actions or his own statements, I agree with him that we should repeal the Civil Rights Act. Because that's what he doesn't like. That's what he doesn't like. Yeah. The Civil Rights Act said it doesn't matter if you're private, public, you can't discriminate based on race, sex, gender. And so if you're doing that, yes, the Attorney General can come down and speak to you. But if you don't like that and you would like to repeal the Civil Rights Act, I agree to your terms.
There you go.
That's exactly why I think he's, again, either willfully ignorant or just not very bright on political issues, or he's just totally blind. I don't know what it is, But exactly, if the Trump's saying you have discriminated in your hiring practices, Harvard, you have rejected qualified Asian candidates because they were overly represented, and you admit this. If these law firms are doing these same kind of racial practices that we have laws on the books are against, then yes, they have the right to stop them from doing these things. But like you said, Kevin, if he has a problem with it, you have to repeal the law. The problem isn't Trump. That's just the thing. That's why it's such deceptive. They don't want to deal with the actual law. It's not an intelligent conversation about the law. It's just call somebody a fascist and a racist and evil because I don't want to deal with the fact that they're doing something I just don't like. But he doesn't want to deal with the fact that if we're going to stop Trump from saying you can't do that to the university, then you have to repeal the Civil Rights Act. There's other laws on the books you'd have to actually literally repeal. There's regulations that govern what federal money goes to what, schools and institutions. And there have been conservative institutions. That's why Hillsdale takes no federal money, because they don't want the strings. He'd like to pretend that there are no strings on education. Leroy, we've been in part of institutions where you have a counseling degree, and because there's accreditation, and the accreditation demands you use the gender inclusive language or the DEI language, you have to teach your curriculum to that language or you won't get accreditation for the course. But
nor will you be able to pass the test that you have, the state test.
The state tests, exactly. So the government's controlling those levers all along. He just, now that they've realized, okay, that's racist, that's prejudice, what has been built into the accrediting bodies. ATS does the same thing. They use the gender language. We want gender, diversity in all of our library sources and all that stuff. ATS, Association of Theological Schools, accrediting for seminaries. That's all they do. But Christian seminaries have to bow to that language, and they can say, well, what we mean by gender is different. And they can get away and kind of hold their nose and do it. But they use the language of accommodation to the secular ideas. So he just, again, maybe he just doesn't know that exists, or because it's his worldview, he just thinks that should be the right thing. That's the morally just thing. Anything out is fascism. It's just mind-blowing to me.
It's like Leroy and Owen were saying earlier, in terms of the left has controlled the culture in the institutions for decades. And for the first time, that pivot point he's talking about, that Zuckerberg talked about, was, for the first time, the country just really rejected all that. And so he's upset that companies like Facebook, Meta, all these companies are saying, wow, things have switched. So we're going to switch. Like, we're going to remove the bios. Mm-hmm. We're going to get rid of the DEI programs. And he's upset with that. He's like, oh, that's just authoritarianism. But it wasn't authoritarianism when all this stuff was being forced, right? It's only when it's the right that it's authoritarianism. But when the left does it, it's not. And it's what they call repressive tolerance, right? Where you condemn behavior from the right that you excuse or praise on the left, right? And it's a whole strategy, and that's what he's doing, because it just makes no sense, because it is clearly a hypocritical stance. He's okay with it as long as his progressivism is being pushed and put up front. But if it's the other side, then, there's a threat, it's tyranny, it's authoritarianism, and oh my goodness, I can't believe America has ended. And so, it's just a double standard.
It's Trump is pulling the levers that Biden pulled. He's flipping the switches that Biden switched. It's just he's switching them in the opposite direction now. They don't like that. Therefore he's a fascist. He's a Hitler. He's a Nazi, because he's flipping the switch. It's only right to flip the switch when my guy does it. This is exactly the problem. And I, as a conservative, have held the position for since my adult life I can remember. The Congress has abdicated way too much power to the president. The Congress has just said, we don't want to, rock the boat. We don't want to have, be accountable to our voters. So they'll pass laws that say, well, here's the money. Just spend your slush fund wherever you want, President. And then that way we have no accountability, because we're not actually passing a real budget, right? The same thing about tariffs. I know we have disagreement. I don't want to get on tariffs at all. I'm just saying, like, I think the president shouldn't have the power he has over tariffs. Has nothing whether I agree with his policy or not, what his goals are. I'm just saying, I think Congress historically had the right to control the tariffs, but they said, well, we don't want that control. We just rather hand it over. So Trump is not doing anything wrong or illegal in what he's doing with tariffs. He's using the laws that were seeded by Congress. And now that he's just, again, flipping the switch a direction people don't like, oh, that's horrible, that's evil. Well, then why'd you give up the power that was yours if you're in Congress? Yeah. That's just insanity to me. So I'm getting myself fired up. I knew I would. I'm sorry about that. But it's just, oh, man. Anyway, so let me, 2 last clips here. And I think I'll play them back to back, and then we'll kind of summarize those and get some final thoughts here. So, and I think both of these clips, the reason I'm going to do them back to back is I think we've covered some of these things here. But this first one really just deals with the idea that exactly what we were just talking about, that, like, if you're not funding my politics, it's oppression, right? That's what we're really talking about here. So let's watch this one.
So it would seem that Colombia has a very, very strong legal case, and yet they haven't brought it. They seem to think they can appease the government. Is that an unfair analysis of it?
I don't know the inside story at Columbia, and again, I don't want to blame the victim here, but it does seem a little bit like the owner of the Washington Post offering to make a documentary about the First Lady. Oh. I mean, it is a kind of deference that feels like corruption, and it's happening because people are afraid that their core operations will become impossible because the government will withdraw its support. Now, there are people who will say, well, if the government supports you, you have to obey the government. Mm-hmm. But the ecosystem of American research and learning for the last 50 years, at least probably since the founding, actually, has been such where the government does cooperate with education and does fund some schools, especially research at schools, because it's in the country's interest that the education system remains independent. If we have like a Soviet-style education system or a Maoist-style education system, we will destroy this extraordinary resource that higher education has been for this country, for its economy, for the culture. With all of the mishigas that happens at universities, there are a lot of
Hey, the Mishigash. All right, all of a sudden, there we go. So, okay, I'm not going to do the second clip in a row because this is like all of a sudden I got triggered again. So it just bugs me. So this whole idea is like, if the government is not, the government owes me their funding to fund our research. They must fund my research, and if they stop funding my research, that is Soviet style government. That is so if the government pays me money and doesn't let me do what I want to do, then that is control. This is exactly what Australia did. So did you guys hear this story about Australia? So one of the things that happened with the Doge is they clawed back several million in research that was given to Australian universities. And so there's this emergency meeting in Australia of all these politicians. What are they going to do? Because apparently their universities now will shut down. That's what at least they were saying, if they don't get this research money from the United States. And this politician, I wish I had the quote. I didn't think about this until just when I was listening to him. This sent out a post on X, and he said, this Australian politician, he says, this is U.S. interference with our system and the way we want to run it. It's like, so when we give you the money, that's not the interference, but when we take the money, that's interference. And this is exactly Roth's position. I'm a leftist, and my politics are the right politics. You must fund me. I'm just neutral. I'm in the middle. I'm the one standing in truth. And if you take away my funding, that is oppression.
Yeah. What he's really referring to is, the last 50 years, what he's referring to is the fact that academia has almost acted in an autonomous way, right? And in that autonomy, what have they produced? They have produced self-hating liberal progressives, right? The stuff that happened on the campus is what they produced, right? The Antifada, this is what they produced, being unchecked, having autonomy, And so now that is no longer the case, and now the government's saying, we're not going to fund you to program these kids to just run around and do all this crazy activist stuff. And then it's like, oh, how dare you interfere with us? It's like, no, you have lost the right to be autonomous and have the benefit of the doubt, because what you've produced is not for the best of this country. And so now he's upset because the government's saying, we're no longer going to fund you to teach kids to hate us, right? And that's what they're upset about. That is what he's upset about. They can no longer have their progressive bubble of academia to brainwash all the kids into their progressive Marxist ideology. How dare the government? Oh, China.
Well,
you know. Go ahead, Leroy.
Think about the part. Think about the part of an Australian government demanding that we fund their colleges. I mean, think about the arrogance in that statement. An Australian government demanding that the United States fund their research.
And we're fascists if we don't.
Who do they think we are? Who do they think we are? It reminds me of this idea, and it is all us. The name calling, the Nazism, the fascism, is all a psychological cudgel. I can guarantee you that they've polled what is it that white people don't want to be called more than anything. They don't want to be called racist, right? You don't want to, if you're white, you don't want to be labeled a racist. And in order to not be labeled a racist, because there's this whole concept of guilt connected with it. And I can guarantee you that this name calling is just a cudgel. It is just a way to beat you up, to beat you into submission mentally and emotionally, so that you will agree with the absolute ridiculousness of any foreign group saying that we should fund their universities so that their universities don't close. I mean, when they say we, let's think about who they mean. They mean the mom, the single mother trying to make it in America. They mean the guy who doesn't have a car, walking to work in the middle of the snow in the winter. They mean those people should pay whatever taxes they pay to fund their institutions. What absolute arrogance. We should have taken their money. We should have taken every dollar of it.
Yeah, as far as I know, we did. I hope we did. At least, hopefully, kept it out. But and not to mention, there are. I can talk to scientists who are Christians who can't get funded for research because they don't take the standard view. He acts as if like this funding is just given neutrally to universities, and the government is just this, piggy bank that gives fairly and freely to everybody up until Trump makes this call. But that is just not true. There are lots of research projects that Christians would love to undertake, whether they be on gender issues or environmentalist issues, or even secular atheists would love the same kind of research money. But they don't fund those things. That's why they're, the funder, they'll fund only the leftist policies that get the money. And so, but if we said, hey, okay, well, we're going to fund your leftist research here, but what if we're going to fund equally right-leaning research? Let's see who's right. Okay, I could see that. Let's two competing research projects both take the opposite view, and the government does. Okay, maybe that's good, but that doesn't happen. That's not what's happening here. It's only funding left-leaning, progressive research goals. And then when he says, hey, we're not going to fund this craziness anymore, that's the fascism. The fascism isn't the fact that they've been doing it to the right for decades. That's what is the myopic, closed-minded, just view that's presented there. Is just, I'm at a loss for words. All right, last clip. Okay.
I found it for you. The quote is from the president of the National Tertiary Education Union, who said, the federal government must push back on the Trump administration's blatant foreign interference in our independent research in the strongest terms possible.
Independent. We have to fund their independent research.
You can't make this up.
This is what Roth just said. It's exactly what it's not. Our research is independent. We demand that you pay for our independence. No, then you're not independent. No. It's like my kid. If I give him, money, it's like, oh, you have to give me my allowance. I want my independence. Well, I have to. You can't make me have a bedtime or a curfew. I have my independence. Well, move out. It's like stand on your own feet.
And it's like in one of the clips, they talking about, cancer research, like, and the Trump administration cut off this funding, and now this person isn't going to get treatment they were supposed to get. And I'm like, if they don't get the treatment, it's only because you decided not to give it without the government funding. You can still give the treatment. You have money. Yeah. You could pay for it. You just made a decision. So if you want to be independent, be independent.
Yeah. Harvard still has a $6 billion endowment.
Exactly. So if you
Princeton,
cut off,
I think, has a $4 billion one.
Yeah, so if you cut off the treatment because the government funding stopped coming, you decided not to do the treatment because you didn't want to go get paid for it. That's a you problem.
Yeah, I think Columbia is somewhere like $4 billion. So if they lost 400,000 from Trump, fund it. You got a whole entire endowment. But no. It must be the public money.
Hold that money out of there.
What's that, Leroy?
Hold that money out. That money out of there. Pay your own way.
I'm all for that. All right, let me give this last clip just so I can justify that time I spent pulling these things, and then we'll close it up after this one.
I was always amazed because I grew up in an environment where people debated and argued, and it was surprising to me that people's feelings would get hurt when you would challenge their premises or felt that somehow you were violating them by expressing an opinion that pointed out that they were wrong on something. So you need to have, this is, I think, what you're describing is the essence of what liberal education ought to be. It is the essence of the humanities. And when we use phrases like wokeness or political correctness, it felt like that was an erosion of that culture of liberal give and take.
I think that's fair enough. I think that the way to combat that is actually just to create the dialogue. Not to back away from it. And, I teach every semester. I've been a president for a long time, but I teach every semester, and I teach very controversial topics about old books, but they resonate, as great books do, with the things in the present. And I always have students who are extremely offended, and they get over it. They get over it. And then, and they realize that part of learning is to hear things that you don't want to have heard. And of course, I would not allow a Nazi to come in and make a pitch in class. I think everyone has their boundaries, but those boundaries should be based on what we can all learn from, not what we are most sensitive about.
Okay, notice the tricky there. I'm open to all of these, well, except for the KKK. I wouldn't let them come in our classroom. The KKK are racist. Who else is a racist? Trump is a racist. I wouldn't let the Nazis come in. Who else is a Nazi? Trump. So he just gave his moral justification for no right-leaning voices because he classifies them as positions too extreme to be shared into his class that he's trying to get to be open. And I just think, again, it's such a dishonest framing. He pretends to be, open and classic liberal in that sense, but he is not at all.
Yeah, how can you say you won't allow Nazis in to give a speech, but condemn people who say globalize the Intifada is too far, right? Like, why is the Palestinian, globalize the Intifada, death to the Jews, all this stuff? That's okay, but the Nazis, I wouldn't allow that.
If a Nazi says death to the Jews, that's bad. But if Hamas says it, then that's just we need to hear. We need to hear them out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well.
Insane.
Go ahead, Leroy.
It's just insane. Maybe I'm speechless because it's not like he listened to a word he said. Be tolerant, listen to other people until they disagree with you, and then it's over.
Yeah. And to his credit, in another part of the interview, he did say that he had Scalia come, Justice Scalia back in the day come and all this type of stuff. But that's not the issue. The issue is in his public statements, right? Mm-hmm. Of everything that was going on, there was no crisis until Trump came in office. Yeah. He was completely blind to all the stuff He was completely blind to conservatives who couldn't speak their mind. Conservatives who whisper, keep them to themselves. He's completely silent on the fact that academia is almost leftist, right? He's completely silent on you being forced to use pronouns. Completely silent on the Biden administration's overreach to silence people who had different views on COVID, even medical personnel, and force companies to deplatform people. He was completely silent on weaponization of the justice system against the former president. He was just completely silent on all of this. But Trump comes in office for a few months and it's like, oh my goodness, fascism is here, authoritarianism is here, and it's just so detached from reality because it's so biased.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and even now, the clear evidence at this point that the Biden administration leveraged social media companies to take off Hunter Biden laptop. That it was a lie and it was fake news, and the pressure the FBI used against that. That's been known for a while, but there's more and more evidence that's come out about it, even in the last couple months. Yeah. And I don't see him concerned about this fascist bent was clear in the Biden administration. All I have is the old tweet. Biden is, we may not agree with him, but we have to support him. Well, but even though he's doing literally the government control of private institutions behind closed doors, that doesn't matter.
That's okay.
Yeah. And I know we got to wrap up, so this would be my closing.
Yeah, I want to hear your final thought from each of you. Kevin, I'll let you go first.
So when it comes to fascism or I'm just going to say authoritarianism in America, the biggest threat to that is government corporate partnerships. Because even Biden said it himself. He was talking to Facebook and all these companies, and he said, you guys can do what we can't do, right? And what he meant by that was our rights protect us from the government. It doesn't protect us from private companies. So when the government pressures these private companies to suppress our rights, he's saying, y'all can do it, but we can't. And so when the Biden administration was forcing these companies to suppress speech and do all this other stuff, that's the biggest threat to authoritarianism in the U.S., not the government. It is the government forcing companies to do its bidding. And the Biden administration admitted that that's what they were doing. And this guy was because it was in the ideological direction in which he agreed with.
Yeah. Leroy, final word. What's our big takeaway here?
I would just build on it and say that what you just described is fascism. They always call you or try to accuse you of what they're doing, and what you just described is fascism. It's where the government controls industry, and in this sense, the government was controlling industry to marginalize a set of voices that it didn't want to hear. Especially, beginning with COVID, the experts. It's interesting. They want us to listen to the experts when it comes to undercutting our faith, right? But whenever the experts speak about issues that they're not really fans of, then they're gonna marginalize you. They're gonna try to destroy you. When the experts were saying that masking doesn't work, and when the experts were saying that not everyone needed to get the COVID vaccine, and when the experts are saying kids need to go back to school, those guys were all wrong. Those guys' voices needed to be silenced. Those guys needed to be excommunicated from the community, and they were 100% right. And it's fascism. That's exactly what it is. It's real fascism, not the kind.
So my takeaway is this: there's a Hebrews 12, verse 14. This to me is the distinction between his sort of what he considers calls classic liberalism, which I would say is progressivism, and I think a biblical approach to all of these conversations for the Christian. Hebrews 12:14 says, "Make every effort to live at peace with everyone." Okay, that's the first part of it. He stops there. Right, that's where you hear him with this modest sort of, I just want to have conversations and I just want to be at peace, and that means I have to accommodate whatever I see. That's where he stops reading the verse. But here's what the rest of the verse says: "So make every effort to live in peace with everyone and be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord." So this is the irony of his entire thing. Is here he's the president of a Wesleyan university. John Wesley Christian perfection, scientific, perfect, right? He's the president of this university that's a Wesleyan tradition of holiness, who only seeks peace but no holiness. When you look at the positions that he takes on these moral issues, the transgender issue, or even I would say the issue with DEI, which allows racism to go from any direction as long as it's towards the oppressor class, which is a Marxist framework, not a biblical framework. But he has no interest in biblical holiness, in his standards, the way he's presented himself. And I can only speak about what he's said publicly and what he's written on this issue, and then also what I did. I spent a couple hours researching his tweets. I'm sure he might have one fact that might be somewhere countervening, because I'm sure he's given lip service to this idea somewhere before. But I'm telling you, what I see in this video, what he stands for, he is not in pursuit of the Wesleyan tradition of Christian perfection by any stretch, nor does he enforce that at his university. So that's what my concern is with all of this as a Christian as well. So with that in mind, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Owen, it was great to have you, Owen Anderson, for a while, and I was glad to get to bring some of his personal experience to this. So until next time, God bless.